Hello everyone, and welcome to round 3 of the 2013 Mopar Canadian National Road Racing Championships from Atlantic Motorsport Park near Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm your series announcer, Frank Wood. In this episode, we highlight round 3 of the Harley-Davidson XR1200 Cup Series from Sunday, July the 28th. Reigning two-time class champion Steve Crevier is undefeated so far in 2013 Harley-Davidson action aboard his Motorsport Plus backed XR. This national championship round is presented by Dealey Harley-Davidson Canada and by Mopar. Starting from 5th position from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, sponsorship from the Atlantic Harley-Davidson Dealers Association for number 80, Blaise Fougere. As we move up to the front row, we acknowledge the 4th fastest qualifier in from Calgary, Alberta on the Ruthless Racing XR1200, number 27, John Ross McRae. Alongside him, his teammate from the Ruthless Racing team in from North Vancouver, British Columbia, mounted on the number 29 bike, that is Darren James. We now move over to 2nd position, P2, 2nd fastest qualifier from Maple Ridge, British Columbia, on the Motorsport Plus of Kingston Harley-Davidson, Dominion Loan Centers sponsored, number 1, the nation's champion for 2 years running. It looks like he may be onto his 3rd consecutive run. He'll start from 2nd position on this day, Steve Crevier. And on the pole, from Toronto, Ontario, on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson sponsored machine, number 15, Michael Taylor. The lights are on. The lights are off. The field is away. Crevier, a beautiful start. Beautiful start by Crevier, and not so good a start by Michael Taylor. I'm going to give Crevier the lead as they head down into turn 2, and I believe that is Taylor, who may have slipped back to 3rd spot by the time they get into turn 2. Right now, the TV cameras, of course, are picking up the footage. Crevier leads the pack, coming out up the hill and into turn 3. I believe that is J.R. McRae, or is it Darren James running back in 3rd? The two Ruthless bikes are running 2nd and 3rd right now, right in behind Steve Crevier, and Michael Taylor, fast qualifier, is mired back in 4th. Watch for the ride now by Taylor as they get onto the roller coaster back straightaway. He on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson sponsored bike out of Toronto, Ontario. Mackey's Harley-Davidson of Whitby, putting that XR1200 up and under our fast qualifier, Michael Taylor, the tough boy. He rides hurt, he rides hard. He's running in 4th spot right now. Blaise Fougere is back in 6th spot, if I'm not mistaken, with Eli DeCash holding on to 5th and JP Schroeder holding on to 7th. Your race leader now, Crevier, coming in through turn number 10. Good lead for Crevier, 10, maybe 12 bike lengths. We've talked before about the different sounds of the different motorcycles involved in Canadian superbike racing, but bar none, there is nothing quite so sweet as the sound of an XR Harley-Davidson motorcycle, whether it be an XR1200 here in road racing or an XR750 in Canadian dirt track racing. They rule the roost. Right now, Steve Crevier with the number 1 plate. It looks like Taylor has moved. Oh yes, indeed, he has moved up in the 3rd spot. And our runner there, was that McRae or James who had the problem? Those two Ruthless bikes, rather difficult to make them out from this distance, but we'll give you an accurate reading on them once they come past Canfield Corner and the Pro Cycle Control Tower. Onto the roller coaster they go. I think that is James. Yeah, James running in 2nd spot on the number 29 machine. That'll be J.R. McRae on the 27 machine, who had a bit of a stall there and has fallen off the pace. He was fighting for 2nd spot there, but has fallen off the pace, as we've mentioned. Right now, here they come in through turns 10 and 11. Crevier, James, and Taylor. Michael Taylor getting into a bit of a desperation mode now. As with due respect, and I think Darren James would admit to me that he can't run the pace that Crevier runs, which means that he may be holding him up. He may be holding Taylor back up from getting a good run at Steve Crevier. We'll see what Taylor does as they head into turn 3 right now, with Taylor right in behind Darren James. James on the 29 bike, Michael Taylor on the number 15 bike, and of course they're chasing the champion on the number 1 machine, Motorsport Plus of Kingston Harley-Davidson sponsored. Steve Crevier leads a 3-rider train coming onto the roller coaster. Meanwhile, back the battle for 4th spot involves 3 riders as well. as Taylor reeled in James on the back straightaway, but just for a moment, James just grabbed a big handful of Harley-Davidson horsepower as into the inside. Taylor has a look, but not quite enough room there as Darren James gently closes the door on the assault from Michael Taylor, and Taylor can still see Crevier up front and wants to get up there with him. Sadly, J.R. McRae now well off the pace. I had it described to me that he's having mechanical difficulties, but as he went past Canfield Corner in the Pro Cycle Control Tower, the motorcycle sounds all right, but he doesn't seem to have the horsepower to be able to keep up. J.P. Schroeder on the Montreal Harley-Davidson sponsored XR1200 gives it a big squirt down the front straightaway and stacks into turn 1 as our race leaders now coming out of turn 4 down onto turn 5. The left-hander there that'll take them onto the roller coaster with Crevier still in the lead, James running in second spot, and Taylor holds on to third. Michael Taylor, we expected an assault earlier from him. We know he's got one of the fastest motorcycles out there. Crevier was complaining about it, that he's got more horsepower than he has, but Taylor at this point in time has not been able to utilize it to his advantage. Right now they head into the 8, 9, 10 combination. Race leaders Crevier, James, and Taylor now running as one. James is putting an inspired ride here. I don't think I've seen Darren James ride this well in quite some time. After that disastrous start he had at Autodrome Saint Eustache in round 2, and yet was able to claw his way up to the podium. This time around he launched very well indeed and was amongst the race leaders right from the get-go. Right now he's running in a very solid second spot, right in behind Crevier as they head into turn 4. Taylor is the man on the hunt now. Onto the roller coaster they go, and he will try to use that power to his advantage. They get down as low as they can get on those motorcycles, tuck themselves in, keep the elbows tight to the body until they hit the corner. Then the elbows come out, the knees come out, the motorcycle goes over almost onto his side as those Pirelli DOT tires start to give you the gription that you need to get around the corners, because the horsepower is nothing without the control. They've told us that time and again. Top 3 riders now coming in through turn 10. Crevier, James, and Taylor stacked up just like that. Okay, here's the inside scoop. Here is the inside news on J.R. McRae, number 27. His gear shift lever is gone. McRae's gear shift lever is gone. He's only got one gear to run with, and of course he's got to keep that motor together and not over rev it. We pick up on the Outaouais rider number 53, Eli the Eel Dekash, as he is making his way around here. Dekash admitted to us that he got bit a couple of times here at Atlantic Motorsport Park last year, putting himself on his backside at trackside on 2 occasions, and it kind of put a scare into him. So when he came this year, he had a little bit of trouble coming to grips with it, and continues to circulate to grab points towards a better standing in the final national championship standings in the XR1200 Cup. We pick up now on our race leaders on the back straightaway. Off of 7, Crevier is riding like a man possessed. He was just bucked right out of the saddle heading into 7. James is smooth, and I think he's going to try to capitalize on Crevier perhaps this lap. Darren James and Michael Taylor distinctly on the hunt after Crevier, but the wily veteran is riding a defensive line. Oh, did you see that? Did you see that? Darren James touching his knee to the ground, the back wheel stepping out a little bit, and a big puff of white smoke coming off the back tire as he skidded it a little bit coming through Canfield Corner. Blaise Fougere got his head down, the throttle wide open, trying to keep up with the lead group, but he's not within throwing distance at this point in time. Your running order is Steve Crevier, Darren James, and Michael Taylor. Then we have Blaise Fougere on the number 80 bike, Eli Dekash on the number 53, John Morris McRae on the 27, and number 181, Jean-Paul Schroeder, rounding out your field. Schroeder being the only amateur rider in the field. And there is J.R. McRae apparently stuck in one gear, which is going to get him nowhere. Schroeder being out of turn 11 as onto the back straightaway. The action continues. Taylor just a little bit off the pace on that one as coming out of turn 4, he didn't seem to be in the same position he was last lap. He was about 4 or 5 bike lengths behind now, going in through the 9-10 combination, which many of these... Oh, down goes Crevier! Crevier has gone down! Oh my goodness gracious, Steve Crevier has gone down. He's up! He's up and okay. Darren James and Mike Taylor just pushed him and pushed him and pushed him until finally Crevier lost it. He low-sided the XR1200, the Motorsport Plus of Kingston Harley-Davidson, slid off the track and then began to tumble. Crevier doing likewise, but as we say, he's got his helmet off now. Let's have a hand for Crevier. The national champion is back on his feet. Hats off to Crevier. He will race another day, and he will go for his 3rd championship before this year is over. Let's pick up on the race action now on the racetrack as Michael Taylor and Darren James now fighting it out for 1st place. Blaise Fougere now inherits 3rd place. He may be headed for his 2nd podium in a row here at Atlantic Motorsport Park. And poor J.R. McRae just frustrated, running so well so early in the race and having that disaster happen of a broken shift lever that leaves him stuck in one gear. Taylor to the inside. Oh, and James slams the door on him. We remain at waved yellow at turn 9, so there's no passing allowed at that point of the racetrack, but Taylor's ready to get the job done. Taylor is all over James right now, and James did it again. James looks back to see where Taylor was, but he looked to his left. Taylor was to the right. Taylor takes the inside line going into turn 1, and Michael Taylor on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson has taken the lead of this national championship XR1200 Cup race. Down into turn 2 they go. Taylor with the lead. James trying desperately to stay with him. Out up the hill, up into turn 3, bank it over to the right, and head that down into 4. Michael Taylor fast qualifies on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson and now has the race lead over Ruthless Racing number 29, Darren James. Blaise Fougere on the number 80 machine, the Atlantic Harley-Davidson retailer sponsored motorcycle rider, looks like he may be headed to his 2nd podium in a row here at Atlantic Motorsport Park, as Eli DeCash holding on to 4th spot in a rather lonely ride, and John Ross McRae simply circulating as best he can and doing some animated communication, shall we say, to his pit crew on pit row, as we now pick up on JP Schroeder onto the front straightaway, and your race leaders Michael Taylor and Darren James. This lap around, it's Taylor that's looking behind him. James has a look to the inside, but there is no room at the end in that regard, and Taylor gently closes the door on James, making his progress somewhat stalled at that point. Down into turn 2 they go. James closes. Darren James closes to within half a bike length, and that horsepower in that Mackey's Harley-Davidson that Steve Crevier was complaining about was painfully evident in the run from turn 2 up into turn 3. It was very obvious that Michael Taylor has a little more grunt on that Mackey's Harley-Davidson XR1200 than what the Ruthless Racing XR1200 is putting out at the hands of Darren James. Michael Taylor seems to have a wee bit more horsepower, but James is getting brave. James closes right up on the back wheel. Now they're coming up on a lap rider. JP Schroeder on the Montreal Harley-Davidson sponsored XR1200 up into turn. Taylor gets through. James is right behind him, and Schroeder wisely holds his line like a gentleman, leaving your race leaders lots of room to get through. Hardly the drama that you might expect. Here now they come through turn 10 with Taylor a slight advantage. I'm going to give him 10, maybe 12 bike lengths now. And James desperately trying to make up the distance on them as he paces himself through this. He's right on Taylor's wheel tracks as they go into turn 1, so he's going to school on the former Superbike champion Taylor. A long history of motorcycle racing underneath that helmet, and Darren James going to school on this multi-time champion Michael Taylor out of Toronto, Ontario, as Taylor makes a return to Canadian racing after a bit of hiatus from it. We've missed him over a couple of years, but when he returned to XR1200 action, we knew we were in for a thrill, and sure enough, the older fellows, Crevier and Taylor, have been putting on a great show since last year. Meanwhile, the younger guns like James and McRae fighting it out for a possible podium spot, but this time around it looks like we have a change in the running order for sure, with Crevier crashing out of it and James putting in an inspired ride here. In spite of losing the lead to Michael Taylor, he has not given up the good fight, and he continues to hound Taylor throughout this race. Now watch this, as Taylor and James are now coming up on a lapped rider, and that lapped rider is James' teammate J.R. McRae. So whether we're going to have any team play going on here or not remains to be seen. I think in most cases these riders are gentlemanly riders, but they are also fierce competitors, and with being teammates, we may see whether J.R. McRae is going to cause any problems for Michael Taylor as they come up into this lapped rider situation, and it's going to happen before they hit the roller coaster by the looks of it, as J.R. McRae leading the three of them coming out of turn 4, but McRae stuck in one gear will not have the selection. He will not have the selection to be able to shift down and get that extra power that the other two riders enjoy. And now Taylor, squirting away from James, clearly gets past J.R. McRae. J.R. waving James on, encouraging him, get him, chase him, get him. McRae waving on James as they come off the roller coaster and make their way into the 8, 9, 10 combination. Darren James patiently waiting back in second spot. Is he going to attack Taylor or not? Is he going to simply follow him home and accept second spot? Pit signals coming out on the pit row rather, as the teams are communicating to their riders to let them know exactly where they stand. Well, of course, Taylor is well aware of where James is, and likewise James and Taylor. Now Blaise Fougere may not have realized that he had inherited third spot, but he does know it now, and it's to the fans around this race course. And if he's able to pull this off, we're not putting any eggs in the basket just yet, but if he's able to pull this off, it'll be the second year in a row that the Atlantic Harley-Davidson retailers have had payback from Fougere in a podium finish. No better way to recognize a sponsor than to do well for them on the racetrack. Michael Taylor leads Darren James now down the back straightaway into 7. James closes significantly as they come up the slight uphill climb and make their way into the final corner combination here. The 8, 9, and 10 combination, which in many cases, certainly 9 and 10, becomes simply one corner for many of the very fast riders. Sean Kelly, the regular announcer here at the Atlantic Road Racing League, working alongside me in the Pro Cycle Control Tower. And this weekend is brought to you by Pro Cycle and Honda Canada. They're presenting the entire weekend for us. The last round we were in Autodrome Saint Eustache, and it was Laval Harley-Davidson. James took the lead there just for a moment. James had passed Taylor. They're side by side now going into turn 3. Taylor and James bumping handlebars. Darren James is fighting back. He has not given up, and he's not following Taylor home. He wants to win this race. Darren James is riding like a man possessed now on the number 29 machine, truly with a goal in mind. Onto the back straightaway they go once more. Taylor has the lead, but James wants this race win more than anything. James now heavily on the throttle as he closes right up on Taylor. This is going to be a thriller. Taylor knows that he's there. He can hear him in his peripheral vision as he banks over. He can pick up that orange, that iridescent orange on the Ruthless Racing XR1200. Meanwhile, Taylor on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson trying desperately to hold on. He's got the horsepower, his fast qualifier. That thing gets the power to the ground, and the Pirelli tires gripping this track surface as they launch themselves off of turn 11 down the straightaway. Over the hill into 1, that daunting dive into turn 1, the right-hander that gives them the short straightaway squirt into turn number 2, the left-hander that will bring them up the hill. That's where they are right now. That's where Darren James made his pass the last lap around. This time around, I think Michael Taylor just may have changed his racing line to block James and make sure that that pass was not going to happen again, because if James gets a clear field of vision once more, it just may be payday for him. Race leaders now onto the back straightaway, the roller coaster it is affectionately known. And of course, on a big Harley-Davidson XR1200, they choose their racing lines wisely as Darren James closes up once more. It's like they have an elastic band between those two XR1200s that contracts and expands at various portions of the race course. Right now it's a little tight as James is all over Michael Taylor coming through that combination, and then Taylor gives it a big old squirt of Harley horsepower and squirts into the lead once more off of turn number 9. Last lap. This is it. 2.6 miles to go. 10 more turns after this one. Taylor leads into turn 1. James trying to find a spot. Now remember, he passed down there just 2 laps ago down in turn 2. If he can get the job done this time around, he just may. No, he didn't get the job done. If he can get into the lead, of course, then he can start to play defense, but Taylor's too wise for this. Look at Taylor. Taylor is probably going to ride his hardest lap on this lap. He is probably going to work those Pirelli DOT tires right to the very edge of adhesion, trying to keep Darren James at bay. Now onto the roller coaster, and this time around, for the first time in the last 5 laps, I'm going to give Michael Taylor a commanding lead now, as Darren James, trying to make a liar out of me, closes the distance. He's only got 3 more turns to get this job done. James, the working man ethic, right behind Taylor, 1 bike length. He closes up to within half a bike length. Now coming out of 9, Taylor gets the big squirt, and the horsepower gets to the ground, and he is leading this thing through Canfield Corner as Taylor on the Mackey's Harley-Davidson. Michael Taylor has scored the national championship win. Darren James brings it home in second on the Ruthless Racing XR1200, and those 2 riders obviously and clearly clear of the field. Tough luck for J.R. McRae. Now here comes our 3rd place finisher, the number 80 rider, Blaise Fougere. Fougere with a 3rd place run on the Atlantic Harley-Davidson, and he's got his hands in the air, a big cheering section along pit wall, and a lot of happy East Coast fans to see that Atlantic Harley-Davidson retail dealers supported XR1200 rider Blaise Fougere out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, scoring a national championship podium. And hats off to J.R. McRae, albeit with a broken shifter, finished the race. And of course, Eli DeCache chasing down J.P. Schroeder, and both of those riders completing their tour of duty. I'm sure that Eli the Eel DeCache just happy to get out of here in one piece, as Doc Walker says. Thus completes your 16-lap national championship final for the XR1200 Cup, as presented here in Canada by Dealey Harley-Davidson.
We're old, but we still work. We still work. Michael, all right, man, awesome.